So let's hear it from our first speaker of the second panel, Mr. Ilja Laurs, who is one of the most successful Lithuanian businessmen of the new generation. He is also the European Manager of the Year, one of the top 25 most famous European technological leaders, one of the 40 most influential global business leaders in telecommunications. And I could go on forever. These are just a few professional achievements of Ilja. So please welcome Ilja. The floor is yours.
Hello, everybody. And Migle, thank you for such a warm introduction. And I'm super happy that those kind of critical issues are so publicly discussed, because apparently it's a very controversial issue, like how far we can go with data privacy. And my presentation will be about one aspect is regulations in general, because apparently the industry is getting more and more regulated by the government. And before we ask what as a user or as a corporation we can or can't do, apparently we must address those issues to the regulators, what kind of environment they are building us. So without taking sides, like really pro or against massive regulations, I just wanted to overview and highlight one aspect which is rarely discussed. And specifically, I wanted to raise an issue with regulations actually, despite a lot of talking, are not that compatible with innovations in general. So a typical user apparently believes that the regulations are there to protect the user and apparently to promote the good on the planet. In reality, it is quite far from the truth. So I really wanted to address a couple of issues in that area. So first, the bold statement is that innovations and regulations do have an inherent conflict of interest. So innovations apparently involve risks for the regulatory system itself. We've witnessed a number of Twitter revolutions, Orange revolutions, Facebook revolutions, etc. So we've seen enough to understand that technology and innovations actually might risk governments themselves. A pretty bold reason, apparently, for governments to see that and to protect themselves, first, against issues in technologies. Second is apparently innovations do raise a lot of risks for traditional large businesses. We've all seen how difficult it is for models like Uber to start at all in many countries because of the massive resistance, particularly from the bodies like taxi associations, professional unions, trade unions, etc., who have developed lobbyist instruments to act actually through governments and regulations. So the very beginning of Uber was actually a fight to get started in New York against the mayor of New York. Just for the record, the mayor of New York has been massively funded by the taxi association. So 15% of the election funds of the mayor of New York actually came from the taxi association. And not a coincidence that the early days of Uber in New York were extremely difficult. So it took a lot of effort. It took personal emails from Uber drivers to the mayor of New York to ask him to personally permit the business model because apparently of the resistance. Innovations do change status quo because that's the very definition of innovation. And apparently, talking of risks, it is naive to believe that innovations in the short run solve problems. No, short run innovations means pains, risks, wild west, and many related problems. So this is the price that we're paying to actually have innovations at all. Now, when you look at the goals of regulations, they are fundamentally different. First of all, regulations are here to regulate and maintain the status quo. That's the very nature of any regulation, any law, any even constitution basically fixes the things that they are now, and the whole body of government and regulations is there to protect that. So no changes, status quo is the king. The second is regulations are there to decrease the risks. So any domain, be it data privacy or fintech sector or anything at all, the very fundamental nature of any regulation is to decrease the risk as much as possible. And apparently nowadays, most of the regulations do protect existing large businesses. So in a private discussion with one corporate lawyer, I've heard an opinion that as much as 80% of trade laws anywhere on the planet actually have been funded and lobbied by the large businesses to specifically protect them against the newcomers, against the potential user clients, etc., etc. So as long as fundamentally regulations and innovations have very, very different goals, apparently it's very difficult to see any kind of compromise. Now, looking at the planet, apparently the regions are pretty different in the ratio of flexibility versus regulation, liberalism versus law. And let me start with one measure, which is pretty often used both in venture world and then the economists, is how actually you measure how successful different regions on the planet are in innovations. So a pretty frequent measure is unicorns. Let me remind that Unicorn is a private company which has reached a $1 billion valuation. Apparently, it's big enough to have an economic impact. And apparently, a number of those companies does depend a lot on the environment, the science, entrepreneurship, etc. But in a big part, it does depend on regulations, environment as well. So if you look today on the planet, coincidence or not, but 50% of unicorns currently are based in the US. You'll know what portion of the planet in terms of population, economy, etc. is US. So 50% of all innovations actually yielding in the US is a large, really large amount, and it's a strong signal to the rest of the world. Now, interestingly, that Europe, currently being pretty much same size in terms of economy and people as the US, accounts for only 12% of the world's unicorns. Asia accounting for almost a third, and the rest of the world is just 15%. So it's pretty clear landscape where actually innovations do happen, where actually the science technology does translate into companies, business models, and this is not Europe, unfortunately. Which to me as a European citizen apparently does raise a high wording, because I do want to live in the region that is innovative enough to be competitive in the new world. And look at the slide on the right-hand side. Here I tried to draw the inverse curve, which exists between innovations and regulations. So the high degree of regulation leads to what I call the Soviet Union scenario, where innovation is killed for a while. A country or a region could exist, but at some point it leads to complete stagnation, inability to compete with the rest of the world, and just a collapse. So I do call it the Soviet Union scenario. Apparently it's very extreme, and I do want to believe that Europe is not there yet. On the other extreme, we call the Wild West. So basically no laws, no regulations, but innovations happen rapidly. As you know, the US as a country would not exist at all if at some point it did not disconnect from the European environment and did not survive the Wild West period, which did allow to build a fundamentally new model. So to me, apparently, there's some kind of balance point between, and currently I would place US slightly left, slightly more to the left of this balance point, while Europeans would be massively on the right. Means much closer to a stagnation / collapse / Soviet Union scenario point than we should be. And this is a systematic problem, fundamental. It does translate into a lot of issues: overregulated markets, apparently inability for companies and startups to build products, and so on and so on. Now, this is the second thesis, is that innovation actually does not come from large businesses. So small evolution does, while fundamental business models do not appear from large corporations. Apparently the force which actually brings the largest innovations to our world is startups. Apparently they have a pace, they could move much faster than anybody. They have flexibility, they have high risk tolerance. So if you try to recall like 10 most disruptive businesses of the last decade, apparently this would not be the Coca-Colas, unfortunately, of the world. This would be the Googles, the Apples, Facebooks, Twitters, etc. of the world. So what's important to understand is that the traditional business does resist it has resources, it has lobbying, associations, unions, and apparently it does employ regulations as an instrument. Again, I would quote the unnamed lawyer who mentioned that as much as 80%, you can debate that number as lawyers, apparently. I'm curious myself to learn, however you do or do not agree with that statement. But a lot of regulatory instruments do exist there to protect the large existing business. And now question is like, what could we do? A really short 5 points that I really want to run. First, as a country, if we talk about innovation, we must hyper-specialize. It's not sufficient to say, hey, like we're a fintech or the IT hub, too abstract. We have to boil down to specific emerging business models, like blockchain, like new wire transfers, like self-driving cars, etc. And say, hey, like these are the unicorn verticals. Sooner or later, there will be a unicorn on that vertical. As a country, we must pick several. We cannot make the environment friendly for everything. We must pick what we fight for. But if we pick a vertical, self-driving cars, perfect example. Again, on the record, I was talking to one Lithuanian transport tycoon, who mentioned, Ilya, calm down. Tesla will not conquer the world soon with their self-driving trucks, simply because we, the existing logistics tycoons, will resist through regulations and good luck. Self-driving cars getting all the car permissions, all the regulations, etc., actually allowing them to exist. Next 15 years at least. That's like a real conversation, real example. So as a country, if we really want to see some specific business models, we have apparently to prepare the right environment, but first pick them, hyper-specialize. Second is dedicated resources, because in reality, currently, every single government body which is responsible for a specific domain, be it like a fintech or transport or data privacy, is actually tasked with protecting what I call punish, fines, double standards, because we do punish local players, we don't punish the Facebooks and the Googles of the world. So unless there is a dedicated resource specifically responsible only for a specific vertical, we can't realistically expect anything to change. Apparently, we have to develop a competence, because if the regulation does not buy the most expensive talent on the planet, it's usually 5-10 years behind. You could not possibly create a friendly, efficient environment if you don't have at least somebody on your side, on the regulation side, on the innovation side, to understand how it works. So again, my personal kind of thinking is that in the most innovative areas, the competence of the staff, of the regulatory bodies is 15 years old. This is like way not enough to even pretend to have something. Another thing is apparently to have and track real KPIs. As any manager says, you don't have what you don't track. So currently, if you read the press or the CNN nice marketing videos, only optical numbers are reported. Like Lithuania has so many hundred startups. The Lithuanian universities have so many patents in their database, etc., tells nothing, because these are very abstract numbers. They don't translate into anything specifically, and it's pretty probably convenient for bureaucrats to use those numbers, because there's like zero responsibility behind them. So as opposed to number of startups, please do report how many jobs, what kind of revenue, what kind of market cap. If you talk about patents, how many license fees have they generated, etc. So using real KPIs, measurable, trackable, accountable, is a must. Otherwise, we live in an illusion that things do happen, whilst in reality they don't. And lastly, apparently, is Lithuania positioning itself as a very friendly for the international companies, for the startups, for innovators, etc., etc. And you could see plenty of marketing messages like that, again, highlighting the abstract KPIs that we've achieved, so many startups, so many companies, etc. Now, in reality, any decent company that is thinking of coming to Lithuania does not do the decision based on those marketing messages. Like a very first thing that any company does is a proper due diligence. I'm absolutely sure that you, as your legal firm, has tasked multiple times with international players saying, hey, like, what's the real situation in Lithuania, not what the marketing says. And the first due diligence round does reveal a lot of issues. Sanctions, fines, barriers, experience negative from the companies that came, immediately tells the company what's the real thing. So I do really want to send that message to the government that it's not the rhetoric, it's the actual precedents, the actual feedback from the existing players that matters. Unless we fix things internally, it doesn't really matter what we talk outside. So short and concise, thank you for your attention, open quotations. Thank you.
Thank you very much for a very interesting presentation. I believe that this question and this discussion of whether regulation or innovation should come first is a really worth exploring more deeper and really with more analysis. And I think that this presentation is a very good beginning where to start. So I have one question from my side. If the audience has any questions also, please, you're welcome to write the questions in the bar on your left, on your right, and excuse me. So I have this question about, well, the last slide shows your LinkedIn profile, right? So I have this question. I saw like 2 or 3 weeks ago on your LinkedIn profile that you performed a survey or a poll for your audience when it comes to usage of cookies and also reading and then comprehending the privacy policies that are available online. So could you please share us a brief overview or your insights of what those results of the poll showed and maybe what was the most surprising part of the poll for you yourself?
Yes, Mikla. So thank you for raising this issue. I think it's an interesting one. So to start with, I'm a user experience freak. I believe that user experience is a king in everything. And I do hate every single thing that kills user experience. So a while ago, I think many have noticed that websites started to use extremely annoying disclaimers on their website. You cannot read a news page unless you click yes, I do agree on the extremely annoying screen, where the option of read more or don't agree is buried. So you're between clicking yes without actually reading, without understanding and getting your article or whatever you want, or spending probably like a good half an hour reading, understanding, selecting options, etc. So nobody clicks, almost nobody, sorry, clicks learn more and so on. So I'm getting curious, is it only me, really saying, hey, it shouldn't be so, or what everybody else thinks. So I just started a LinkedIn poll. Interestingly, over 1,000 responses came within a week. So it's not like a couple of friends sharing, it's a statistically representative sample. And I figured out 2 things. One, on the question of whether you do or don't find annoying those pop-ups and menus and disclaimers, 80% says yes, it's extremely annoying. I received a couple of responses that people actually wanted to quit internet completely because it became unusable. So 80% say it's extremely annoying. But that's not the most important part. The other issue was with, do you understand or do you bother to read what you actually are agreeing to? So again, interestingly, 80% said we click OK without reading that. Blind permission to whatever the companies have written in those disclaimers. Moreover, of those who actually do bother to read, 85% mentioned they don't understand what is written because it's the legal language and it takes how many? 5 years in university to really understand legal language. It is not for every human, for sure. So 85% say, I don't understand what's written there. So I just agree because otherwise I don't get my service. And I think this is wrong, fundamentally wrong, because asking a person to sign up a text written in Chinese, because otherwise you will not cross the street, you will not buy your Apple or whatever you want to do, it's just fundamentally wrong. It's just asking a person something he does not understand to be asked. And the metaphor I came up with, and Miguel, I shared with you, is say, hey, you live in a city. What if every single time you want to cross the road, you have to actually read 15 pages agreement on crossing the road, because the road would say, hey, like you could be hit by the truck and there are cars over there. You have to understand what the green light is, etc., etc. And either you click OK without reading, understanding, get hit, and well, that's your fault because you could have understood this, or you just don't go. So living in the city would be a terrible nightmare. Every single time you cross the street, you have to read 15 pages and click OK, I do agree on the specific crossing of the road. That would be nonsense. That would be stupid. That would be wrong. So I think exactly the same is happening currently on the internet. And again, my personal thesis is that look who benefits from those things. And weirdly, but the large tech would benefit massively because it's a legal permission for a lot of firms to actually legitimately now use your data if they want to. So yeah, so I validated the poll. Again, I didn't really do anything to the results, but at least I validated that it's not just me. It's a majority of people feels this is a wrong approach.
I agree as well. I'm one of them. And I believe that this discussion about cookies and tracking technologies will be further explored by one of the speakers. Will speak in probably half an hour, Valentina Skniva, who is the Vinted DPO. So he will probably take it from there. I know that he's here with us and listening to us. So hopefully he will have also some remarks to put here. Well, one last brief question before we switch to the other presenter. I see and I feel that you are quite skeptical about GDPR and about privacy laws in general, probably. But is there any one positive aspect that you could find or could share with us that you really see some positive changes in privacy laws and something good has happened to you or something good has been brought to you by GDPR and privacy laws?
Well, I started to see much less spam. So I'm grateful for that because it kills your time.
At least one, that's good. So thank you very much, Ilja. It was a pleasure to have you here today.